The August 30th, 2010 meeting of the Agenda Charter Committee will now come to order. Will clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Barker? Here. Mr. Eckel?
He is here. I'm sure he'll be here momentarily.
Okay. Mr. Esposito?
Here.
Mr. Howland?
Here.
Chairman Yolovich?
Here. There's Mr. Eckel. Is there anyone signed up for the public forum?
Yes. Tom Gregory.
Mr. Gregory?
I hope you'll forgive my over-involvement in these sessions here. I understand there's somebody is selling dartboards outside with my picture on it. But seriously, I'm here to speak to you in favor of Mr. Esposito's suggestion that we go to a two-third, or motion that we go to a two-third approval for LCDs. You know, I've been involved in this for a long time, and I shouldn't hold that over your head, and I'm not trying to. But the fact is, I love government. I really love government. And I've seen attacks against this legislative body in the context of term limits, which I don't agree with. I think you're term limited at every election, as Wayne Zyra used to say. And I've also seen basically the precluding of your legislative discretion, as mentioned in the previous committee meeting, such in the context of selecting a public defender. I think the way that we're going through with our LCDs is not very much unlike the way we're opposed on one side against groups wanting to be part of this process, almost garnish this process based upon their competence when it comes to our public defender. And yet in a lot of ways, these LCDs are much like the very groups that we would be arguing against, wanting to garnish that authority which is vested in this legislature. If you think about it, your power is based upon something really simple. The one person, one vote principle. The only difference is each one of you represent, I think, on average about 75,000 people. But by having your districts and each one of you representing 75,000, that guarantees that one person, one vote principle. I think with using a simple majority to basically create these LCDs, in part what we're doing is we're actually taking the vote away from a lot of other people. And I think it's consistent with our thinking to basically look at a better way. I don't believe in the LCDs for one reason. I think they do have some strengths, but they take my voice, not my voice, but as a public, they take our voice out of something that should be in your discretion, and we have access to you. I know where to find every one of you, at least on the second Tuesday every month. I got no idea where these LCDs are meeting, who they are, what the boards are, anything else. And I think Mr. Esposito's point is well-founded in democracy. I'll close on this point. The question is, on a question, the question is process more important or product? And if you think about the reason why our country is here in the first place, it was because process matters. And when you look at the very first thing that the people of New York State and throughout this country wanted, they wanted legislatures. They wanted a voice. And these LCDs, I think, preclude our voice. And I think one way of restoring, at least in part, that balance is to accept this motion. If not in this particular moment, I would say that worse, to put it in a context where this legislature really looks at the merits, which I believe Mr. Esposito's motion has complete merits. I would like to see it voted positively tonight. But at worst, I would like to see it put up for discussion and more introspection. I'd like to see some real serious restoration of the one person, one vote, and getting rid of these LCDs, at least in the form that we're making them presently. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gregory. As a point of information, it's Mr. O'Brien's resolution, not Mr. Esposito's. Is there anyone present who is not signed up to speak who would like to address the committee at this time? Seeing none, the next item On the agenda is the approval of minutes. You have the July 26, 2010 minutes before you. They will stand approved unless the clerk is notified by any changes by the end of the day. Next item on the agenda is new business. Madam Clerk,
Referral 10-247 to require a two-thirds vote to incorporate a
moved by Legislator Eckel, seconded by Legislator Esposito. I see that Mr. O'Brien is here. Would you like to speak to your resolution, sir?
Courtesy. Excuse me, thank you. I guess I'd like to start by saying I think that really at the core of this referral is something that I think we should be striving for, and that is to make our county legislative body more of a full partner in government, and I think that ultimately is what this referral hopes to do. And to illustrate that point, right now it may be even somewhat amazing it was certainly amazing to me as I researched LDCs in this community, that in our county, that there's LDCs that I didn't even know were on the books. An illustration of one called the Granite Building Development Corporation, which was formed purportedly to relieve and reduce unemployment, promote and provide for additional maximum employment, better and maintain job opportunities, and lessen the burden of government. I don't know, as a county legislator, how that mandate may be or may not be being carried out for us in this county now, and it would be something that I think would be appropriate for a county legislator to know. Right now, looking at what list I could compile from financial year-end statements, and again, it was something amazing to me to see that the total bonded indebtedness issued by LDCs created on behalf of Monroe County exceed $350 million. We're talking about an enormous amount of bonded indebtedness that's been issued theoretically on our behalf, but outside of our purview, and that's really important for us to recognize. So I think that it's important that the legislative body be aggressive in monitoring and scrutinizing the use of local development corporations, and the requirement contained in the referral that we have a two-thirds vote of the legislature is really a product of the fact that right now, if the county legislature is asked to approve bonded indebtedness, we ask for it passes with a two-thirds vote. And frankly, since I've been in the legislature, that hasn't been a problem. It's sometimes led to some very vibrant discussion, which I think is appropriate. But since I've been in the legislature, anyway, we've never ultimately, at the end of the day, with maybe one exception on a small project, voted against the issuance of bonded indebtedness when it was appropriate. And so it's not that we're looking to be, certainly, I don't see it as a Democrat or Republican issue. I think it's an issue of the legislature taking control of as it rightfully should, in reviewing the condition of county governmental operations, even to the extent that we may think that it's appropriate to utilize a local development corporation. But it ought to be very carefully scrutinized. It ought to be subject to the kind of debate that a two-thirds majority vote would entail. And this would be true, now under the current alignment between the parties and in future decades and generations. I just think that it's prudent. It's a call for what I believe is a good government measure, and that it will hopefully avoid some of the kinds of questions that have recently arisen. I know we recently formed the M3S LDC to purchase communications equipment, and that decision may ultimately prove to be the appropriate one, but a competing bidder has certainly raised at least issues about whether or not the process for purchasing communications is costing or not costing taxpayers. In some counts as a question of some millions of dollars. And the unfortunate thing is that we now, as a legislative body, aren't able to really join that discussion. The decision has been made, and we've offloaded that responsibility to a local development corporation. That may be the right decision, I don't know, but it certainly points out the fact that we have to be very, very careful and judicious when we are determining to form a local development corporation to carry out what has historically been a governmental operation. And I would strongly encourage my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to pass the referral on to the full legislature tonight so that we could take a thoughtful and careful consideration of what is the appropriate approach that we as a county legislature take towards the creation of local development corporations. Thank you.
Thank you, Legislator O'Brien. Is there any further discussion? Legislator Esposito.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank you for extending that courtesy to Legislator O'Brien. I by no means will rehash what he just said, although I do agree with most of it. I would just like to point out one thing, that this would only affect prospective local development corporations that we would be creating. It is not related to any LDC we've created in the past, and while we've certainly had some lively discussions about those and the issues that currently are involved with some of those LDCs, I commend Legislator O'Brien for looking at this from a process point of view. As this committee is well aware, I think the process matters. I think the way this body matters, and I agree that we should assert our authority to ensure that LDCs are created in a manner that's consistent with the greatest will of the people of this county as possible, and I'd encourage you, my colleagues in this committee, to favorably advance this referral. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Any further discussion? Sorry, Ted.
I was just going to make a follow-up point, if I might, just because
All right, I'll
just to
allow it.
close the loop on something I started to say and then didn't finish. I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman, and that is just simply that I started to talk about the fact that our legislative body we require a 2/3 vote to bond to indebtedness, and it wouldn't make sense to create an LDC with less of a vote when we are in fact one of the powers of a local development corporation is to issue the debt themselves. So I mean, it would create the circumstance, regardless of what administration is in power, or whatever, where you could do an end around the legislature and avoid the scrutiny that certainly the people that devised our charter thought was a wise thing to do in requiring a 2/3 vote for bonded indebtedness. And I just hadn't really closed the loop on that point. I appreciate your indulgence, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Opposed. Motion fails. Are there any other matters to come before this committee? There being no further business, the August 30th, 2010 meeting of the Agenda Charter Committee stands adjourned. The next meeting of the Agenda Charter Committee is scheduled for Monday, September 27th at 5:30 p.m.